All right, I'm going to call the March 22nd, 2023 Policy Committee meeting to order. First, 1.02 is approval of the February 22nd Policy Committee draft meeting minutes.
Yeah, I support approving the minutes.
A second. All in favor?
There we go.
1.03, public comment. Looks like we have one public commenter. I'll read the disclaimer here. The Board of Education and board committees welcome public input, but abusive or threatening language or action will not be tolerated. FCPS staff and community members must be able to conduct their work and engage in the public process in a way that is safe and respectful. We will not permit hate language, threats, chaos in the boardroom or anywhere in FCPS. The board welcomes and encourages public comment, with the exception of confidential and personnel-related matters and issues pending in appeals to a local or state board. Individuals may speak about matters relating to the school system. If individuals have specific concerns relating to the actions of staff members, such concerns may be communicated to the superintendent, who will address the concern with the appropriate staff. If the concern is about the superintendent, an individual may share that concern with the board through written or private verbal communication. Public comment is not intended to be a question and answer platform with the board, and generally the board will not respond to comments. If you are speaking as an individual, you have up to 3 minutes and you'll be asked to complete your sentence, and I'll be keeping the clock here on my phone. And if you're speaking on behalf of an organization, please identify the organization you're representing and you'll be given up to 5 minutes. So we only have one on the list, and that's Mr. Kapowitz.
Do I need to speak from there, or can I do it?
Yes, please, if you don't mind.
I don't mind.
And please do state your name.
I'm Richard Kapowitz, Indivisible Frederick. I'm here to speak about two of your policies, 1.06 items on the agenda, 1.06, the policy 443, and 1.08, your policy 314. Policy 443, you have groups that are opposed to that policy. They will even come in and give you junk science. I want to let you know the following organizations oppose any changes to the brilliant policy 443 that you have. These are organizations, not individual people that they'll bring forward with their junk science. Support for pro-trans policies, for treating kids with respect for who they are and allowing them to be their authentic selves, is provided by the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education, the American Association of School Librarians, the American Counseling Association, the American Public Health Association, the American School Counselor Association, the American School Health Association, the Association of Title IX Administrators, Child Welfare League of America, Mental Health America, National Association for College Admission Counseling, National Association of School Nurses, National Association of School Psychologists, National Association of Secondary School Principals, National Association of Social Workers, National Education Association, National PTA, the Society of Pediatric Nurses, and the School Social Work Association of America. So whatever these people who believe that they can number a policy 445 and overthrow 443, they are going against all of these organizations of professionals who have looked at the treatment of trans and gender non-conforming students in our school systems across the country and said, you need to respect children. The policy as written is fine. It doesn't need change. It doesn't need modification. You need to resist any and all attempts, please, to make the lives of these children worse, to create a situation in which the suicide rate goes up, in which a child, by being disrespected through the policy changes, is then subject to bullying, because if the teachers and the school staff do not have to respect the child for who they are, why should their fellow students? You will create a situation in which we will lose children. And I mean lose by suicide, lose by them no longer being able to express themselves, and the psychological damage and physical damage you'll do to their lives. The other policy I want to address is your policy 3.14. It is political activity as it relates to distribution of campaign materials using Frederick County Public School mailboxes. And what I'd like to do is urge that in 3.14.2, political activity on school premises, you add an item F. The item F should read as follows. In support of FCPS mission to create engaged citizens, high school main pages will include public notification that students and others may register beginning at age 16. The public will be told they can register, change registration, check registration, make changes. And the website address and QR code for the Maryland Board of Elections to be displayed with this notification text. I would note, I have been told by the Deputy Superintendent that including that information, some might consider it political. The Maryland Board of Elections website is completely and totally, by law, nonpartisan. It contains links, and the link that I have provided to Dr. Dyson with proposed text is a link that allows you to do those things, to register, to check your registration, to change your name, your address, your gender designation, your political party. While we do register and have the ability in Maryland to register for a political party, that website does not in any way, shape, or form promote any specific political ideology or political party. It simply allows you that option because Maryland is a closed primary state. You can only vote for the candidates of the party for which you are registered, or, as we did during the primary, if you are registered as an independent or unaffiliated, you can vote for a nonpartisan race, the school board. There is zero reason not to put on the high school pages this information. If you are in the policy working to have engaged citizens, if you are permitting a nonpartisan voter registration to occur, which is in the policy.
Can you finish up?
Yes, sir.
You can send that
I
to us.
urge you to add that additional F to 3.14.2.
Thank you.
Excuse me, I didn't sign up. I get 10 seconds just to make one comment.
All right with that? Sure.
It won't take more than 15 seconds.
All right. You can have 3 minutes. You can have 3 minutes as
I
an
don't need
individual.
3 minutes. I just want to make a comment. I thank you for letting me get it.
Sure.
I just want to make it clear, I represent Transparency in Education, one of the sponsors of the new policy. We don't oppose 443. What we're saying is that it went in 6 years ago and it needs to be revised. Initially, it was well-intentioned and it was the right thing to do to recognize and welcome non-conforming gender students and transgender students. But it didn't take into account the impacts that would have on the remaining population of the students and the families. So we don't oppose it. I just want to make that clear. We think that it's a good policy that has to be made better. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. All right, so we'll move on to item 1.04, policy 116, Title IX, sexual harassment.
So policy 116, sexual harassment, is a relatively new policy. And when we developed this, we developed a general complaint form that was also associated with making any kind of complaint of discrimination or harassment under your, I think it's 306. So really, or 309. So today, just based on input now that we've had some experience with the new policy, Ms. Nguyen recommending that we have a separate form within the policy relative to it being a Title IX complaint. That doesn't prevent people from filing a complaint under your current policy. It just really specifies and delineates. And so I just want to ask Julie if she wants to give any kind of comment or thoughts based on the form that you're proposing.
Sure. So we found the previous form that we had was a little cumbersome for people to find and to really understand. So we made some updates and also made the form fillable. So that way it was easier for people to complete to kind of facilitate that process.
And can it be submitted online? Or do they
Absolutely.
have to
There's an
print it?
email
Okay.
address that it can be sent to.
But that was one of my questions. I think I support this new form. I think the fillable PDF certainly helps. Sending it by email helps. The easiest thing or another step might be, right, you click on a form on the website, type it in there and hit submit rather than attaching it to an email. Is that an option?
That's a future enhancement. We need to make sure the security is there. Right now, Google Forms would be the most common, but the security behind Google is not really something I would encourage because you're putting some very sensitive information into that. So I certainly would love to get to that enhanced stage where it can be an online form that you just click submit, and then we can make sure that it's facilitated directly to our office.
When they, on that same vein, when they click on the email the form, does it just pull up an email with this already tagged?
No,
already?
they have to attach the
They have to
form.
actually attach it.
Correct. So in order for them, when you pull up the PDF, you would need to complete it, save
Right.
it to your desktop, and then send it as an attachment to the email. So
Okay.
the electronic format that Mr. Bass has suggested would be much easier, and that's something that we can certainly partner with our DTI partners to look for future enhancement.
And the email's within the form. So as far as the office
Yes, I
form, here's
see
the
that.
email, and that
Yep.
is an
All
email
they have to do
address.
is, I mean, like, my experience is if they click on that hyperlink, it will pull up
An
a blank email with that address already there.
Correct.
Then all they have to do is take the saved PDF, attach it.
And do you have any concerns about will you still be able to very easily receive sexual harassment complaints that are filled out on the other form? Or do you think there could be any confusion or delay in receiving those complaints?
We would certainly accept anything that's completed on an old form because the true matter is that there's a concern there. And regardless of how we get it, we still need to act upon it. So we've been ready to update the form and have it available immediately on the website. But if somebody has an old saved form from previous years, because we sometimes find people may save it to like a folder or their desktop, we would certainly accept that as well.
And both forms go to the same email address. And so even though it's a current form, so I would say it's not an old form, it would be a current form and then a new specific Title IX form.
Mhm.
Both of those go to the email address that Julie monitors regarding responding and investigating complaints of discrimination.
I think this is a good change, and I really appreciate the work that you guys have put into this.
All right, we will bring that then back to work session next.
Yes, please. Thank you. So next we have 1.05, policy 506, evening
this-
high school.
Yes, and so I'm gonna, thank you, Kathleen and Mike. I'll let them introduce themselves. And this was a recommended deletion, and I'll have them give you a little bit of background and answer any questions that you might have about our current school. Mike or Kathleen, who
Well,
wants
I'll start. Good morning, Kathleen
morning.
Chappelle, Director of High Schools. We are here, well, Mike, you want to introduce yourself?
Good morning, Mike Watson, Principal of Frederick County Virtual School.
So we are here this morning just to ask for the deletion of policy 506 entitled Evening High School, and we are not eliminating any programs, but the policy does not reflect our current reality. It is outdated, and what we now have is a strong continuum of offerings for students in a variety of ways and times and so forth through our virtual program. And so we have removed Frederick County Evening High School or flexible evening high school terminology from our regulations and updated to show the full spectrum of programs. So I'll let Mike talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, this is really just to kind of bring us up to current, bring the policy up to current practice where we have a variety of program options through Frederick County Virtual School. One of them used to be flexible evening high school. This originated from a time where we actually had students coming in face-to-face, getting like packets of information, and this was at the old Walkersville B building like many, many years ago. Over time, that's transitioned to having students doing virtual courses, and even though we brought them in about 3 years ago, we started removing the in-person component, and they do that all through a Google Meet. So it's kind of eliminated this idea that it just has to be in the evening. We have some more flexible options for students based on their schedules. And some of the situations that they're dealing with in their lives. So students have the option to come to us, still earn the same amount of credits that would be required for graduation, just we wouldn't be calling it evening high school anymore.
And does it have any impact on the number of students that we can take?
Nope, not at all.
Almost outside of this policy, but related to the, remind me the exact name of the program. that-
Flexible evening high school.
Okay, flexible evening high school. And I knew you looked familiar. I had the opportunity last year to speak at the graduation,
Correct.
which was just extremely powerful. I mean, clearly, I don't know, every student there is in a better spot because they had this opportunity. I didn't realize that it's all online. I thought it might be, was it a blended program recently?
It was a blended program up until the pandemic. So we were bringing students in face-to-face at our offices at TJ Middle School in the evenings. And then, of course, with the pandemic, we shifted to doing those required meetings now through Google Meet. And so that has shown a lot of success for our students and given them more flexible options. So we've decided to completely remove that in-person face-to-face component. And we do that with all of our programs through the virtual school now. So we always have a face-to-face Google Meet component for all of our programs. It's just now we're not requiring students to come to TJ Middle School. And so for a lot of our students who would normally enroll in a flexible evening program, coming to TJ Middle School created some barriers because we're pulling from students from Thurmont, from Urbana, from Middletown, from Brunswick. And so getting transportation to TJ Middle School in the evenings created some conflicts for some of our students. So going virtual and using the Google Meet component has kind of opened up some doors and provided kids with some more access to complete their high school requirements.
I mean, certainly deleting this policy sounds like it won't change practice. And I think then I can support deleting this policy. I think in some sort of different setting, and maybe curriculum and instruction would actually be the better setting for this, to just explore with the board whether there'd be any advantages to some in-person supports for students who are going for this kind of alternative program. I just, the access points that you're speaking about make sense to me, but I also wonder, I don't know, if someone doesn't have reliable internet, but possibly has a reliable car, you know, or just needs some in-person support. As one board member, I would love to see that as part of what's offered, but I also recognize that's kind of outside of policy and that's more curriculum and instruction.
And Mr. Best, we do have programs where our students can get access to our courses from their home school buildings. So if for some reason internet was an issue, we've worked with some families who they can actually go into their high school building even after school hours in one of our credit recovery programs that meets with a mentor face-to-face. So there are some options when we come into maybe those kind of roadblocks that you might have. So we would manage that with the school, the student where they're enrolled.
And that's after hours?
Correct.
The final question is just, is there a way to memorialize what we offer now for this kind of support? I guess I just have this, it's an unlikely scenario, but I just think that if we as the board are supportive of the services that are being offered now, I would like it to be documented and memorialized somewhere that this is the general policy preference of the board. Do you think that would take the form of a replacement policy or more detailed superintendent regulations?
Well, Ms. Flappell's been very busy relative to modifications to regulations, which triggered the policy change, so.
So just recently, and certainly Mr. Watson did a lot of the legwork on this. Regulation 411 has been updated to reflect all of the programs offered through Frederick County Virtual School. And so we have asked across the board to use just virtual school as the umbrella. That includes all of these programs, which are our during school, after school, remote learning, in addition to this program for students who need just a few credits to earn their diploma, whether they are a parent who has not yet completed a diploma, a student who needs to work, and potentially these are dropouts. that need the most flexible response from us. And so the changes to Regulation 411, I believe, have been signed. And so that updated regulation reflects, it might be perhaps something to review prior to then asking for anything further if you think we need something additional.
Or I could attach it to the first reading. Want me to do that?
That's what I was
That was-
thinking
that
was
was
going to be
gonna
our
be-
work session. Yeah, right, that we also get to see the regulation at that time. Good.
Mhm. Not our first rodeo.
That's right.
Thank you. Any other questions?
No?
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much.
Thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
Okay. 4:33. All right, Paul, Dr.
All
Vivo?
right, now we're at
Okay.
1.06, policy 443, creating a welcoming and affirming schools for transgender and gender nonconforming students.
And this was as a result of our last policy committee. The policy committee asked Dr. Lebo to gather some additional information about the cost of single-use bathrooms. And then Mr. Bass, I know you had some follow-up questions as well that you sent us. And so do you want us to first start with sharing the information that you had requested from the last meeting?
When I look at what I submitted on, I think on Sunday, I think I just wrote, is there data we can review before the meeting regarding single stall bathrooms? I think this will be more efficient than reviewing the data in the meeting for the first time. I think on policy 443, that was the only question I submitted.
Okay.
So yes.
And so, good morning.
Morning.
Appreciate the opportunity to be here. And so some of this, I think we're going to seek some clarity from the policy committee as well. And I know we're trying to move expeditiously with this, but I want to make sure we're responsive to the board's needs. And so the answer of access to single-use restrooms, nothing's easy in my world. There's no simple answer.
Shocking.
And so let me just give you an example. In some of our elementary schools, we have many single-use restrooms that are in classrooms. However, in the common spaces of those schools, there is no access or very limited access, and so maybe there's access in a health room. So for community events, large-scale events, even if we have portable classrooms at those buildings, there wouldn't be access to a single-occupant restroom because they're contained within a classroom. And so really would need help understanding from the board the exact criteria that you would like staff to use to determine access. And so another example, we have plenty of schools that have a single occupant access in our health rooms. Does the board or the policy committee feels that is sufficient to answer, yes, does this building have a single occupant access? What I can tell you is we will never be in a position to have convenient access to a single occupant stall in all of our buildings. Just it's the nature of the size of our buildings and how they're constructed. So, but we can, I think, get to a point where there will always be access to a single occupant restroom if that is in the best interest of our students and our staff. And so I apologize for coming back sort of with questions, but I wanted to have that dialogue with the policy committee of, I think we can get pretty easily to let's have access to a single occupant restroom for all in every one of our buildings. But just wanted to make sure that that met the intent of the policy, that we do have access, but recognize that it might be in the health suite in some instances. It might just be one that's in the middle of the building, might be in the far corner of the building. It just, I don't think we can modify to create convenient access in all locations. So I apologize for coming back with questions, but that to me is sort of where we are. I think we can get to a yes. It's just how do we want to get to the yes?
I don't mean to put words in the student's mouth that sent this. I think what they're asking, what they're looking for is non-stigmatized access to a restroom where they don't have to ask. You know, in this case, I think they would have to ask, right? They'd have to ask, can I use the bathroom in the health suite? Can I access a bathroom in a classroom? So I think that's what they're asking is it possible to provide access to a bathroom that they can just, I need to go to the bathroom, and they walk into a bathroom. So I think that's, again, I don't mean to put words in their mouth, but I think that's what they're inquiring.
That's how I read the email request that we received. Yes.
Okay.
Well, and the student, I interacted a little bit with the student, and I felt it was more along the lines, if if a student has said, look, I prefer to use a single stall, can it be in the health suite? It's kind of known, it's an accommodation, it's often, has a common understanding in the school. Sometimes the counselors will generate that, like, hey, why is Paul always coming up and using the health suite? It stops doing that when we've said he prefers that, that's the accommodation we're gonna provide. So I think at the school level, when we're supporting the student and saying, here's some 2 options, and it's not like every day you have to seek permission. It's an understanding and it's that support plan for the student. Where the issue was coming up was sometimes I have to be late for class because it's at the front of the building, and it's a stigmatizing effect that now I'm back in my class and I'm a little late. Now, we have made accommodations to indicate, you could be a little late, but that in and of itself to walk in late. So I think that was a little bit of more of the dialogue I had with the student.
Like a more centralized location.
So
of the
that's, yeah, that's
bathroom.
what Paul said. Sometimes it's here and sometimes it's here, and sometimes,
Yeah.
by golly, it is central. But to say a one size fits all, to say make every school have a nice, easy central would be certainly have some cost implications.
And I do think it's important, I can speak for my staff that says we certainly recognize the value or the importance of making students feel comfortable. So we are committed to, where we can, we'll modify and create, and that's really that dialogue with school administrators. I mean, I can speak personally with a conversation with one school administrator, we problem solved how could we create more accessible options for students, and that was a somewhat easy move. And so and I think language in the policy would be important to say that that's the stance of the system, and I think it reflects practice. But I also didn't want to be disingenuous to say we can move walls in all cases and make it convenient.
Yeah, I don't know, broadly speaking, I think that makes sense for standing schools that are currently exist, I think. Yeah, what about for new construction? Can we get, single stall bathrooms in central locations in our new construction?
So I think generally speaking, there is more single use access in central locations in our newer construction. I think we need to identify them a little differently. So I'm thinking off the top of my head, we have some that have typically been used as staff restrooms, but there are multiple of those centrally. So I think if we work on some signage for those and ensure that there's a sufficient number in central locations. And again, I always think the worst case scenario, if, because I think a lot of the questions that, well, would a restroom in every classroom help? Well, yes, except when those classrooms are occupied or they're not occupied and the doors are closed and locked, people don't have access to them. So I think we can certainly commit to that and include that specifically in our design.
And then I don't know that it was Frederick County. I've been in a lot of gyms. But I believe there are high schools somewhere that have they title it a family restroom outside their
There are
gyms in a
some of
main
the schools.
hallway.
Correct.
Is that true in Frederick County?
We do have a couple family restrooms, but certainly not all.
Okay.
Yes.
I just thought I had seen that outside the gym. It was a designated family.
If I'm thinking of one, there's one right. On that, but yes,
I'm the same way. I just recall seeing it. I couldn't remember if it was in Montgomery County or Frederick County.
Is there anyone else who should be, Dr. Lebo, it sounds like you're working pretty closely and well with the principals. And I think you've both spoken about we don't want students to feel stigma around, I don't know, around a request to use a single stall bathroom. Should anyone else be brought into this conversation, such as maybe the student services team
Or Miss Artist is, she's connected with certainly students too. And I would say Miss Artist, Miss Shipman. Here, you want to come up? You want to share?
Because I think the student, when the student wrote, they implied that they were speaking on behalf of not just themselves,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
the population.
right?
Would you like me to answer any particular question?
Well,
or-
just as far as, you all support schools when they're working through accommodations, and you kind of have a great sense of, what's happening, what's needed, and what students are saying, what are we doing well? Would you have anything you want to share from a editorial perspective?
From our office, I have not received any complaints of this nature. I can say this year, not that it's not a concern, but I would say right now, concerned with Dr. Label said, I would say that it could probably be a procedural modification. We can make it the school-based level on how to accommodate these students without creating a stigma and without creating platform for them to have to out themselves or do something of that sort, for example. But so far this year, I have not received any complaints in my office or any kind of notification that this has been a systemic issue.
That kind of leads to my question. We were talking about the health room. Once they indicate they're going to use the health room the first time, from there on forward, they just walk in. It's just.
Yeah, it's like that, and that's the nice thing about both in the policy and reg. It says, how can we remove obstacles? And then if the student's comfortable, there's kind of a team of support that says, what feels comfortable for you in the day and the life? And of course, Ms. Shipman could, she trains counselors with that and has, I just was involved in like summer workshops when we created the training, but that's a very real part of it. And so we don't get a lot of like people saying, hey, somebody violated my rights. As a matter of fact, the opposite. It seems like that plan within the policy is working very well. And when it's not, we do hear, from that perspective as we would want to.
And in reading the policy in regards to the policy, it sounds like we're meeting, in this case, 443.6. We're meeting that part of the policy.
Yes.
And that we're doing everything in our power to make it a non-stigmatized.
Remove obstacles, et cetera. Yeah.
Yes, right, 443.6, access to gender segregated facilities, right? I guess the issue is for students who are non-binary, right? I also want to know, I just, I've tried to figure out how to best say this, but right, like there can be a student who needs to use the bathroom and, wants some privacy while they're pooping. I don't know, right? Like a single stall bathroom can benefit students who are trans, cisgender, non-binary. I mean, I really think single stall bathrooms can benefit every student.
And maybe that's a point. Maybe I hate to get into any edits, but because the second paragraph actually talks about access to, basically gender neutral. It doesn't specifically say that, but it says the options include private.
And before it says, if for any
restrooms.
reason they don't want to use a gender
Correct.
segregated facility.
Correct. So it's in there. It's just
Not in the title.
Yes.
No, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Wait.
So maybe that's one of the clarifications the student's looking for too, is that 443.6 does cover the situation. And we're certainly doing everything within our power to make it as non-stigmatized as possible within the constraints that we have as far as facilities and budget.
I think I have two more questions. I mean, one would be regarding new construction. I mean, is there further direction or action that you would need from the board for us to look at having more centrally located single stall bathrooms for students in new construction?
I don't think so, and I think the Yellow Springs design, which is the next, that and the Middletown projects would be the first time at SDs. When we bring that to the board to make sure we're capturing your intent. Typically with design guidance, this is where staff will say, this is what we've heard from the board. And then we'll review that and we'll believe we capture your intent, but when we come with the SD presentation, if that doesn't meet your intent, that's really the time for the board to say, that's close, or, could we tweak this a little bit, or no, that's exactly what we were thinking. Can you continue to move on?
Okay. Not as a design person, but it just seems like in the design phase, you would think in those schools where the cafeteria or the gym reside, which is often in the center part of the school, would be a natural place to put a single stall non-gender restroom.
My second question, I think I'm wondering, I'm wondering if it's accurate to say that generally there's really good strategy sessions between, most especially between Dr. Lebo's team and a school principal or maybe a school guidance counselor. I assume they generally happen when driven by a student, not necessarily a complaint, but a student question on best bathroom to use. Is there value in having these conversations proactively with every principal? You know, and I don't know that it has to be immediate, right? I mean, I think it could be, you know, over the next several months in the spring and summer, but having these conversations proactively so that principals are ready to kind of identify a more private or gender neutral bathroom for any student who might come to them.
So I certainly think, I'll take that, and I don't want to speak for Dr. Lippy back there, but I think we can make that a summer priority for principals to, and I think those conversations really have already gone in, if not out loud, sort of in principals' heads of, there's a myriad of circumstances that they support students on, and how can we best facilitate it in their building. And so I think we can just say, hey, practically this summer, just make sure we've identified clearly in our buildings and have a plan. If for some reason we think we need to improve that, and then start working with our maintenance and operations team on sort of unbudgeted requests to enhance that. But I really do think we can identify in every school building a location that can support students, and then we can talk about improving that, you know.
And then ensuring that our policy is consistent across all 68.
Well, and that is where too, and I'm sure you can kind of collaborate with that work, because Janet Shipman and the counselors do annual training with staff on the policy. This policy and this reg gets a lot of training, discussion for that very reason, so that we can proactively look at evaluating the request together, et cetera. So I think that has a natural organic connection to the facility piece too.
Okay.
All right, sounds like a plan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we're
So
on
with
to
that, there's-
1.07.
Yeah, and
fire
so
drills in
with,
school
with
buildings.
policy 443, I'm not going to advance that any further. I mean, we had some information come back, but if, we typically would only give a first reading if it was a first reading on a change.
Correct.
So I think this was for discussion and information for the policy committee. You want to do anything further?
I think
Do we, I mean, you said you've had interactions with the student that asked for the clarification.
And I got back with her at after our last
And so you
meeting.
would do so after
Mhm.
today?
Yep.
Okay,
Fine with that.
great. Thank you.
Please stay after paragraphs.
All right, so it is 1.07, policy 410, fire drills in school buildings.
And this is an update relative to the formatting changes and the reference to the law. And Scott Blundell in particular really felt strongly to delineate the differences based on sprinkler systems in the school and to identify that. We talked back and forth, should we just make them all required at the level? And there was some good pros and cons by that. And at the direction of the policy committee, what you directed me to do is to capture what's in the law and to reference that. And so that's what I've done, and we're bringing it back for your review and any additional edits before we would take it to a first reading. Paul, do you want to share anything about the new language? Well, it's current practice, new language in the policy.
Correct, and I know, and Mr. Blundell's actually a Frederick guy working with Frederick County Health Department, one of our partner organizations, where we always talk about opportunities to improve partnerships and conducting community drills. And so that's why he's unavailable right
He's on
now.
a drill.
He's on a drill on a day when we don't have students in the building, so that's a good thing
Oh,
to
yes,
work
that's
with the
right.
health department on. And so, yeah, as Jamie indicates, that is the language in the law. There was a question of should we not delineate the requirements differently for schools that do have full automatic sprinklers, and just keep it simple. Like, let's have 8 drills across the board regardless. Certainly the language as written is in compliance with the law. And some of that was, the confusion of, am I partially sprinkled? Am I fully sprinkled? Do I not having, and trying to simplify for our administrators. But if the board's intent is to just make sure we're mirroring the language in the legislation and take a code rather, that we have no issue with that. But we were looking originally to provide some consistency for administrators that regardless of the building, you're going to do the 8 drills, fire drills specifically. So
regardless, unless you have the fully automatic sprinkler system, in which case you can do 5.
And that mirrors the language.
Yes.
Correct. Correct.
I mean, for me, with this mirroring the law, yeah, I think it's appropriate change, and I support the policy as written.
We'll bring it in as a first reading.
I did have just for, I remember attending a meeting where you told the board this. How many buildings do we have that are fully sprinkled?
I apologize if you're not having that.
Okay. But I know that you had provided it at a board meeting at some point.
Correct.
But do we have a significant number of our schools? I'm assuming we do because of age. Do we have a significant number of our schools that have to do the 8 fire drills?
We do have quite a few that have to do that. I don't know if significance is the right word, but we do have quite a few that have to meet that requirement.
Okay. And just, I'm asking a question, this is what I shared was, the reason there's no subsequent regulation with this policy is, wouldn't it be redundant? Okay, because we're following the law. That's-
And I know that let me just add a point of clarification on fire drills in our schools. So as those of you know, most of my experience was in adult settings, not in student settings. I am always amazed at how quickly our administrators and our staff can safely evacuate students. I will tell you, I wish that the adults that I have worked with in many other organizations could have followed simple procedures the way our students and our staff do. But I think that's a credit to our school staff. They understand the importance of this, and they can really evacuate a building quickly because it is such a routine procedure. So it's really not anything to be fearful of when there's sprinkler facilities that our staff do train to take it seriously. And when you can get a high school out in 3 minutes, it's pretty impressive.
Okay, so we will bring that then to the board as a first reading.
Thank you.
Dr. Lebo?
Thank you very much. We'll move on to 1.08, policy 314, political activity.
Hi, and Dr. And this was actually at the direction of the board, that the board, after the last election, wanted us to look at this and clarify some things, especially as it relates to your policy statement. You know, the board affirms that using FCPS resources for political activities is prohibited. And then on the second page, we kind of delineate a little bit about what that means. And so I just want Dr. Sergo to kind of give a little bit of background to some of the conflict of language or the interpretation of language that we had, because our goal then today is to determine if the policy committee wishes for us to deliberate on clarifying, taking that back to the full board. It's always a little easier to do that when you're not in an election season. So that's why Brad particularly said, bring this back, but give it a little time. And so didn't want you to think I forgot, but that was the direction of Mr. Young.
Thank you for your honesty.
Thank you. So I want to provide you some framing in relationship to your questions before the meeting, Mr. Bass. So if you don't mind, I'm going to get up for a second. The first is the actual document in question. And the second is, I think, Mr. Bass, you asked a question about previous adjudication. And so there's a letter there from 2016 that was received by central office, by legal services from Christy Anderson, who is the MSEA legal counsel. And so those are both relevant because they're germane to the questions that you asked about sort of the policy. And so, you know, Ms. Canham certainly can correct me if I'm wrong. My involvement is relative to the timeline of this particular issue being raised. So obviously, as a designated superintendent in the Office of the Chief of Staff, when community concerns come in, I am often sort of the first responder to those responses, to those concerns. And so we received a concern in late October by an individual running for office that we had provided access to the associations to provide political material. And if we were providing it to the associations, then they would like equal access. And so in looking at the policy and working with Ms. Cannon, essentially this has been debated before. I think MSEA's position is sort of whole objection to the policy in many ways. They just feel like it's an overreach. But essentially, the issue is that our associations, through their membership, have access to mailboxes. There are some guardrails around that, around time of day, They're allowed a bulletin board, things of that nature. But what it does specifically say is that it's for their association materials. And so it sort of places the notion of political materials in a separate category. And so in talking with the associations and in reviewing the materials, sort of they situated this particular handout as sort of association union business. But if you review it, sort of the objective view would say it's pretty holistically election material. And so that became fundamentally the issue. And so working with our chief negotiator, we circled back to all three associations because I want to acknowledge this was both in their minds not a new practice, not a new material, but the first time it had been sort of objected to in this way. And so what it said was, you're allowed to place things in mailboxes. It just can't be only about an election. And so that was fundamentally the issue at hand that I think then generated the inquiry coming back to the committee.
Briefly, when you say it can't be only about an election, so if this booklet had been 20 pages with only 4 of them candidates that were endorsed and how the endorsement process works, would that be okay? Or is the issue that basically 100% of this is endorsed candidates?
So the legal research that we evaluated back when we actually wrote this, because that was a very big point of contention, and the legal advice that I provided is there is legal support that says a union does have a right to have a newsletter and give you news. And if it happens to also say there's an election coming up and here's some information and it's within that, then the legal teasing that out is, is it a duck? Is it campaign material? Or is it their newsletter that happens to mention a very timely public related event going on? And so that's, what lawyers call, we balance that out. It's very fact driven. And so at the time, Ms. Anderson and I talked a little bit about that. And I said, I think the law does support a strong, union access to information. Here's your newsletter. This is what you pay us for. Here are current events of what's happening. And so that was the history that I recalled versus it's 100% completely campaign literature. I think the case law would say, no, that was the reason we teased it out, saying, well, let's talk about what is the document, what are the 4 corners of the document, and that's how we evaluate it. So I agree with Dr. Sergo, this clearly is not, it's only about that.
So in terms of your other question around access to mailboxes, our negotiated agreement does provision that they are, in the agreement, it specifically says on, slide here, sort of under Article 2, Rights and Privileges, Item 7, says in compliance with board policy and FCPS regulation, the association has the right to use interschool mail, including email and teacher mailboxes, to distribute official FCTA notices, flyers, and other material when such material is presented ready for delivery to the school representative. Material distributed in teacher mailboxes by the building representative will be provided to the principal, but advance notice is not required. It also has another item relative to the use of bulletin boards that are reserved for the association, either in the faculty lounge or common planning area, that can display notices, flyers, and association-related materials. And so, sort of the question would be, well, is the agreement in violation with the policy? I think the position that we took at the time was they were in alignment, that they have access to the mailboxes, to distribution through their representative. The associations did not violate that. They drove these around. They did not use our in-office mail. They did not use our courier. And this, again, I want to represent their interest, which was this was not a new practice for them, but it was the first time perhaps that it was challenged very specifically. And in reviewing the material, I did communicate pause in whether or not this was considered a union newsletter or an election material. And it said that moving forward, they needed to make sure that that was balanced in what was included in what they have access to for their members.
And under 314.3, and this is kind of where they relied a little bit, it says, well, this says I can't distribute campaign literature during an employee's work time or during school-sponsored activities. But I said, but in there it said, that union information has to comply with our policy. On the first, policy, it says you can't use our resources for political campaigning. And like I said, if it was their material, like their newsletter, circular, and on the bulletin board too, is one, and that's where we I guess, debated and agreed to disagree on that point at the time, and that's where the board landed. This was a very comprehensive discussion with lots of input from the associations, legal counsel, our negotiating team. This was probably over 5 different months that we, the board was very deliberate, because obviously it's high public interest, and also to parents, you know, when we look at, you know, political information coming into the schools. And I loved your questions on voter registration. We're very careful and thoughtful how we do voter registration, because we have to be mindful of our nonpartisanship and that influence with our students as well.
So if we're going to go down this route, doesn't there need some clarification within the policy?
I don't think there's any policy revision required. I think the redirection that we provided in the fall with the associations was very clear. They understood, I confirmed their understanding in writing of what constitutes association material distribution. I would think I'd want us to continue to get some legal guidance around making sure that we don't inadvertently restrict the policy in a way that isn't legally defensible around the rights to free speech. And so I think if the board would like us to go further, I think we need to continue to gather some sort of historical information around what revisions we would even be recommending.
Because I guess I need some clarification on what the redirection is. Is the redirection that they could have done this if they hadn't outlined a bio of everybody, if they had just put in the corner, here are endorsed candidates,
Basically,
and the
yes.
rest of it would have been picnic coming up, this
Correct.
coming up.
Correct.
But the redirection is they could have done this, it just shouldn't have been 100%.
They
Yeah,
can
what-
share their position as an association around who they support. As that's not a secret. They do that in many ways.
Mhm.
The issue becomes when it is using our system resources, materials, and mailboxes, if you will, specifically to do that. It has to be more balanced. That material is fine on its own, as long as it's not coming through our mailboxes.
Because I guess that goes back to Mr. Bass's question. If this had been 20 pages long and the other 18 pages covered picnics and gatherings and happy hours,
That is my
Then-
understanding.
then it would have been okay.
That is my understanding.
I'd like to see a stricter policy, and I certainly look to our legal counsel to guide us toward a stricter policy that doesn't violate the law. But for me, I don't think that's what school mailboxes are for. This is campaign material. And you say you redirected, but did this end up in every mailbox?
Well,
After the fact.
it was after the fact.
You redirected after the fact.
Because it was only reported us in late October. So for a subsequent communication, I would not expect to look that way.
But I don't know. I mean, what are the harshness of this question, if it's harsh, is not directed at you, Dr. Sergio, but what are the consequences if MSEA were to do this again?
I have found our association partners to be very collaborative, and so I think we all have the same interests. We're not trying to restrict anyone's right to free speech or their right to exercise their political affiliation or interest. So I think they want to be good partners. I don't think they are looking to take advantage. I have their confirmation in writing that they understand the direction that I provided. I would have nothing to believe that they wouldn't honor it. But if you're asking more specifically, I think from a functional perspective, as a good partner, I would ask that while we're not required to approve their materials, I think it would be a sign of good partnership to share them in advance next time, so that we can cut anything off at the pass, should it be controversial in any way. If you were to suggest, should the policy delineate that particular part of the process around, I think that gets us into a little bit of a gray area around managing the business of our associations that I would be reluctant to sort of suggest. But I think functionally, it's probably more of a verbal handshake than a policy revision. And I do understand your interest.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but there's next to nothing as far as I can see where we do a verbal handshake.
Right.
Everything's adjudicated. I'm very uncomfortable with this.
Well, Dr. Sergo did do a very nice job with the affirmation from the union. So where I think there was a verbal handshake too. I think by the end of the day, you said, could you please affirm your understanding? And Dr. Sherrill now has that, which is her legal file and my legal file and her, what I'd call the meeting of the minds of what the words mean. I think now we have that layer in there as well.
And just to re-clarify what I said though, is that it was re-clarified that if this had not been 100%, it would have fit within
It
that
would have been permissible.
permissive. So they could have just listed the name. These are the candidates we support.
Right, but I also, right, but I hear what Mr. Bass is saying is even that level of access gives you pause.
It does, but I also, it's an interesting thing. Yes, I think it's good that we're starting this conversation at policy committee, but I don't know, I think that I don't have I'm not sure I have specific words that I would change in this policy. I think it would be an interesting conversation to have with the full board. I'm conscious that, I don't know, there may be a variety of views on this. And so I feel very strongly that political materials should not be in employee mailboxes. But I want to hear from all our colleagues on this. And it's not that I have a particular clause that I say, okay, if we switch 314.2, I don't know. So I would certainly like to see further discussion on this, see where our colleagues are, or do you think that we should have this further at policy?
I mean, I guess I'd like to see us maybe bring it back to a full policy. Because it gives me pause though, that entities also have First Amendment rights. So we have to be careful about a Pandora's box of restricting, and I've had this discussion with individual teachers about the bulletin board in their space. I mean, are we going to start restricting what can be posted? Because this policy says classroom bulletin boards.
Yeah, we do have the right as an employer to put some guardrails up around what is considered permissible in a school building.
But I just feel like we got to be careful about what we're opening up here as far as opening ourselves up as an organization to, because we could say, well, what are the consequences to them? Or what are the consequences to us? If we go so far, where we say, well, you know what, we're gonna restrict you. You cannot have any political speech whatsoever, because then how do we define what's political speech in that they're asking for volunteers to come out to the polls?
Well,
The
Or they're
political
asking-
speech is defined as advocating for a candidate.
Right.
and there's case law around that. I mean, that is protected speech.
So
Oh, wait, and so you're saying advocating for a candidate
Right.
is
versus
fully
volunteer,
protected
if it
by
was
the
seeking
courts.
Volunteers. And no, but so political speech, because we had to go through this, what is political speech? Is it putting a bumper sticker on my car? And we've had this discussion from a First Amendment perspective as far as teachers wearing certain shirts and and so I can have something on my shirt. I can have an apple, but that doesn't say I'm promoting the apple ballot. It just might be I like apples. And so when we did research that before, is what is political activity? It is advocating for a candidate. It's not, can you volunteer to, gather things? It's the advocacy for the candidate is considered political activity.
So is this flyer considered advocacy
Yes.
in the eyes of the court?
Yes. Yes, which the courts have said. Now, before you say no to everything, is that more union speech informing their members or campaign literature? And that's the gray legal balance.
Because that's my question, because obviously we're saying that page 1 is appropriate.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, yeah, so page 1 is
This
about the
election
importance of
matters,
election.
here's the
right.
voting
okay.
locations, that type of thing. But
Right,
there's subsequent pages, let's say, again, I just want to be clear about this, the subsequent pages are all about endorsements and their bios.
Yeah, I mean,
So if they had taken all of that out and then only had a small quarter page box, let's say, on the back that said Apple endorsed candidates, support your Apple endorsed candidates, and that's all. Are we going to stand that that's not appropriate? Because it doesn't sound like that clarification that you provided to them is what that is.
the conversation we had was that moving forward, the materials to be qualified as association business materials had to have a balance to what they.
So that's where I'm getting at. Had to have a
Correct.
balance.
Correct. And that this did not have a balance.
Yeah, I mean, they even call it
II.
general
Right.
election. I mean,
And the agreement of
And it-
anyone.
right. And I think it puts.
Even those that are
Right.
listed, to clarify, all those that are listed on here, I being one. So
Right.
just to be clear, I agree that there's no balance in this flyer. So,
Right, and-
but if there is, and my balance would be if they had a quarter page where they just listed all of their endorsed candidates along with all of their other association news, that would be balanced.
And while I would agree that would look less blatant, I think it would have the same effect. I guess when I think about how organizations, including employee unions, I feel like there are two main options for getting political materials to voters. One, door-to-door canvassing. Two, mailing materials to people's homes. This third option of just placing it in employee mailboxes is one that I don't want available.
And so we just clarify, it doesn't go in all employee mailboxes. It only goes in association members' mailboxes.
They actually. Yes, I believe so, although I imagine,
I actually asked for that clarification. was
yeah,
told
that would be
yes.
my understanding, I think in terms of intent, in terms of whether or not that actually occurred. We would have no way to confirm. Yeah.
I think that is the intent, and I've heard
That's
that
their, that's,
before.
That's
my
their
understanding
intent.
is that's their
That
intent,
is
that
their
they would,
intent.
they only distribute these to actual members of the
Right,
association.
which we would assume that the representative know whose mailboxes they should go in. To say, could somebody listening to this say, I got one and that didn't apply to me, that's of course possible. We would have to acknowledge that that's possible.
And I just clarified, speaking with one principal, I was told the boxes are tagged,
That would be a great strategy then.
so that they know that they are association members. Because it's not an uncommon practice. They do send out their newsletter. They occasionally send out some information, and that's their method. Because they avoid the use of FCPS email.
They don't use email, they don't
Don't
use our
use email.
courier, they drive these around to all of their, all of their work locations.
Yes, they don't
Their
use
reps.
courier, yes, they do not,
Right.
because this policy applies, they don't use FC.
Correct, materials.
Our definition would be, is the mailbox
A
in Baltimore an FCPS resource? Their stance is they do not use FCPS resources, because they don't use the courier, they would never use email, they would, just to clarify.
Correct.
Yeah, I hope that I don't come across as inconsistent, but I mean, I would argue that FCPS email is less of a resource than the mailbox in the school. I don't know. I would imagine that may be a very specific take that maybe others don't share, but I don't know, off the bat, there is something particularly, specific the mailbox itself to me is an FCPS resource. It's in the building, it's taking space, right? In the building, it's a resource, and political materials ended up in that resource. This is a problem.
But then the question there is, that would be a negotiated item, because we provided them access to the mailboxes in the negotiated
In
agreement.
accordance with board
In accordance
policy and
with the
reg.
policy.
And that was
So
language
they
that
already
took a
have
while to get.
access to the mailbox.
they're
It's
allowed to do
our
it now.
decision on the clarification of what goes in the mailbox. We
Yeah.
can't say, no, you can't use the mailbox, because that's negotiated.
Correct.
What resource or not, that's part of the association
Right,
negotiation.
we're having a wellness fair, come join us.
Yes.
Put that in the mailbox. I
Yes.
think it's specific to the type of material in
Correct.
question.
But
That's
it's very
our,
circular.
that's our only, say, power. That's our only power, is to limit what goes in the mailbox. Not the use of the mailbox, what
Sure.
goes in the mailbox.
Because it does specifically, and we went back after we had this first dilemma. Because, you know, obviously, over 25 years, each time there's an election, something pokes up. And so the board gave a parameter to go back to that article to say, in accordance with FCPS policy and reg, you can use the mailbox, you can use the bulletin board. So what's the reg say? Well, you can't post things about drugs and alcohol and these are political materials, that would be against 314. So that's kind of the history and the discussion around, okay, did we have a meeting of the minds? Was that clear? And I can definitely see why they were thinking, well, but I didn't use direct, not on my work time, didn't use the email, drove them there, only put it in members, you know, mailboxes.
That's also a distinction that I didn't realize before. I personally need more time to reflect on how I feel about that, but that is an interesting distinction if it only went in member mailboxes.
Okay.
So these would be folks who have paid additional dues
Right.
to be members of their employee union.
Yes.
And those who did not pay those additional dues would not get this political material. That's an
the
interesting,
intent. That's the intent.
yes,
Yeah.
it's an interesting distinction. I don't know, that complicates this for me.
Well, and I think if you, as a follow-up, if you have time to read sort of this letter that we was sent to us, I think that's sort of the crux of what you just indicated is sort of what MSEA's position is, right? They talk about the fact that associations, you know, that there are inherent rights to being the exclusive bargaining representative, and that sort of we are, their argument, without evaluating it, I'm obviously not an attorney, but their argument is that we cannot create policy that restricts their rights as that exclusive bargaining agent. So I think this may be helpful, Mr. Bast. Maybe we can return to this policy discussion after you have a chance to maybe look at this, understand sort of what their perspective is. And I think to be good partners, while I certainly have informed FCTA that this was a conversation, this is a document produced by all three associations. They all co-sign on it. And I think it would be important to give them an opportunity to share their perspective as we have those conversations through a public comment opportunity.
I think that's a great point, and we can also, it give us time to
Yeah.
review this document and bring it back to policy.
Yeah. I had one or two more questions. I think the policy as written doesn't prohibit some sort of voter registration drive of students.
Right.
And, you know, it is critical that be done in a nonpartisan manner, probably by the Board of Elections.
Yeah, and sometimes the League of Women Voters does that, but and that's Ms. Lapel and Colleen Bernard usually kind of coordinate the advice and have a very nice kind of how's that handled and a guide sheet. I brought you a copy of it in case you wanted that. But yes, that is the intent and the criteria.
Yeah. Have we had voter registration drives for high school students?
We have. Kathleen, do you want to speak to that?
Pre-pandemic, that was a regular occurrence, usually in the spring and sometimes in the fall. It's election season, we allow for two. And they were coordinated by the League of Women Voters and the Frederick County Board of Elections. Generally, what would happen is they would communicate centrally, and I would let principals know that they would hear from someone in order to establish the best date for voter registration drive, which usually took place then in the cafeteria over lunch, so that all students had access.
So the most recent one might have been fall of 2019.
The most recent one that I recall, in terms of all schools with all registration, may have been pre-pandemic. Last year, Oakdale High School requested permission for a student-run voter registration drive, and so that was permitted. That was no outside agency involved. It was student-sponsored, the faculty advisor, but they had to follow the
prescribed procedures that are outlined in the document that Dr. Bernard has put together. So she and I work together to make sure that we are providing the opportunities in a nonpartisan fashion in accordance with our policy. I anticipate that we will see that just ramp back up post-pandemic, that we will be seeing with this upcoming election, a request for voter registration drives in person again.
Yeah, I mean, nearly everything, you know, academics, sports, extracurriculars, everything has come, I don't think we have pandemic restrictions anymore. And so I would look to nonpartisan voter registration to come back in full force. My personal preference, but I don't know if others would share this, is that it only be you know, Frederick County Board of Elections. I don't know. I don't necessarily have more to say on that. And but yeah, I think that it is so critical. So one, it's so critical that we engage in this around civic engagement and ensuring that students have this opportunity, easy opportunity to register to vote. It is also essential that this be done in a nonpartisan way. I'm most confident that that could be done by the Frederick County Board of Elections. I would welcome an update to the board on whether this can be and is done sometime this spring. One more thing briefly, I think there's real value in it happening throughout 2023. You had mentioned as we approach the next election. I think voter registration drives not tied to any upcoming election is ideal. That's another way that we can frame this and maintain this as a civic duty, untethered to who's running in a particular election. I'd like to see this happen for 2023.
And prior to the pandemic, annual events were occurring. This is about the time of year that we would hear from the Board of Elections related to voters inquiring about setting up dates for those drives in May. So we're right at about the time that inquiry.
Yeah, I agree. I would love to see biannual events just on our calendar, whether they surrounded Veterans Day, Martin Luther King Day, you know, something close to those holidays, which builds civic awareness among our students. And if run by the Board of Elections, I would encourage us to get it on our calendar on a biannual basis so that we're offering that to our students and their opportunity to be good stewards of our country.
Look at how that can be.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I wanted to quickly say, yeah, I did have a third question.
Okay.
Those political signs in the grass by our school, it's excessive. And yes.
I'm out. That's
Sure, Dr. Serco, thank you.
Come on. You know, it's interesting. We've had this discussion among candidates, among about could we limit, you know, we talked to the library about this. We talked that why not just one sign per person? You know, I mean, yeah. I mean, but I know it's outside our purview.
Correct. And I do think, and I guess clarity for staff would be important because elections have changed, you know, post-pandemic and sort of how we have operated. And so I wanted to just clarify for the board how staff has been operating and make sure that we still believe that this is in the spirit of the policy. So you're correct. The only limitations we can have is the distance to the door and when they can be placed on our property and when they can be removed. The only difference has been the inclusion of drop-off boxes on our properties, and the state does not count that as a polling location. And staff has taken the stance, and generally speaking, primary and general elections occur during the school year, except for the day of the election, and then we're off. And so staff has said, we do not believe it's in the school's best interest to have a sea of signs for like a month, right, when the drop boxes are there. So our stance has been that the law does not require that, and we acting on the board's behalf as the property owner, don't want a litter full of signs in front of drop boxes for a month, because that's not a legal requirement. We also want to be supportive of elections. We want to continue to have drop boxes available. We understand that to be pretty successful from the board of elections perspective. So that has been staff's perspective of, we will be in full compliance with the law, but we're not going to go above and allow it more frequently than what required.
Agree 100%.
What currently, is it the early voting period when the signs can then be on the grass outside of schools?
If the school is used as an early voting center, that has only occurred once, that I believe, and that was Middletown primary during the last election cycle, but that was also during the summer. So I would not anticipate that we would have an early voting center again, because typically during that time period, we have school.
Yeah.
Because it's in the spring.
Yeah.
So.
And there are only 4 sites throughout the county.
Correct. And there was an issue with the Board of Elections availability to a site. So we obviously are good partners with Barbara Wagner and her team. And so that when they approached us and said, this is a no-brainer, we can certainly support that because we don't have students in our building. So at Middletown Primary, they had a longer period when signs were allowed to be in front of their building.
But I'm trying to remember, so if election day is, if the general election is on a Tuesday, you're saying that Monday morning, outside of those schools, no political signs would be allowed? It wouldn't be allowed until
5 p.m. the
It's
day
5
prior.
p.m. the day
Really?
prior.
Correct. And they are to be removed by 8 a.m. the day after.
The next morning.
that, I think that my recollection may be of other sites. Maybe I'm thinking of the Urbana Library, for example.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, 5 p.m. the day before to what?
8 a.m. the day after.
I mean, that's actually a
And
very
that-
tight
that-
time
that-
frame.
That's actually a Board of Elections rule.
Correct.
And the library themselves clarified that rule this year because so many people left their signs up or put them up early. So the library actually clarified that rule. It is a Board of Elections rule that 5 p.m. prior to the day and by 8 a.m. the next morning, they have to be gone or you could be subjected to a fine.
Then I think, I don't think any clarification is needed. That's.
It is the early voting. If we would give up an early voting site, that's the issue because that runs for a week.
Yeah, but it seems, as you said, it's unlikely that early voting would take place in the school year in an FCPS building.
Unless the primary election day is moved to the
Can't see how
summer
we would
again.
accommodate, how
We
we could
can't.
accommodate, we couldn't accommodate ours for a week.
Right.
Couldn't do that. Yeah, so. I will say this, I would, this is, again, as an observer, it was wholly inappropriate. There were candidates boarding school buses in the summer. And that's wholly inappropriate, and we should have.
That'd be using one of our resources for campaigning.
That's right. That was wholly inappropriate because we had summer school going on. School buses were pulling up at the primary school in Middletown and candidates were actually boarding the buses to speak for the bus drivers. And I would love to see us address that. Yeah. Because that's wholly inappropriate.
So we'll bring this back at a future meeting and Dr. Sherrill will give the associations a heads up to come and maybe give their thoughts and input as well. That sound good?
And a future meeting being a future policy committee?
Yeah, it says return to policy committee, Dr. Sergo to invite associations for further discussion.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then we'll make sure we're sharing this with Ms. Gallagher
Yes.
so that she has this, can read that letter and.
So are you, Mr. Bass, is your pause that you think, I heard you mention more than once, wanting the full board to weigh in? My counsel would be perhaps we do one more round at policy committee to see if we're actually recommending any revisions and then bring that to the board for a full first reading. And I think with the new chief legal counsel beginning, we would also want some time for him to just do some law review and look at the file that I know Ms. Cannon has and sort of be able to weigh in and offer insight. And I think some benchmarking with some other districts around this would be important. I don't think that the approach or the policy here is an outlier or unusual. And so I just think that it's also important that we, sort of look at our standard as we weigh ourselves against our other LEAs.
I can support all of that, yes.
Okay.
Agreed.
And would you like it at the April do we have an April policy?
They have a special April one.
Oh, that's the long
So
one.
it would be May.
So it's May. Okay,
Yes,
just so I,
please.
just we can manage that. Of
Yes.
course, okay. I think that's more than enough time.
Thank you.
Thank you so
And
much.
if,
Dr.
and if,
Burrow.
and if necessary, I mean, this is something we
I
can continue to
understand.
address. So if necessary, we certainly help with that.
All right.
All right, so that takes us to 1.09, our policy review schedule on April the 26th.
Yep, and we'll have that ready, and you're looking at the 300 series, and so I sent that information to Dr. Sergo and Ms. Nguyen, Director of HR, so their teams are looking at reformatting it, bringing you recommendations for that, but that'll be a nice grouping, so to, batching, that we called it,
Okay,
for that, so they're working on that, and that'll be ready for your April meeting.
and we're planning 9 to 12, is that the time?
Say,
We
9 to
certainly-
12.
9:30 to 12.
9:30 to 12:30, okay.
I think that makes
I
sense
knew that would make sense.
for
Drop off, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, so 9:30 to 12:30, good. Okay, all
All right, thank you.
right. And before we get to adjournment, I'd be remiss if we didn't recognize that this is the final policy
Yes.
meeting for Ms. Cannon. And although I haven't been in this position or on the board for very long, I just wanted to personally thank you for everything you've done, not just for this committee, but for the entire Board of Education and for our community.
Thank you.
I just want to recognize that you've been a tremendous resource to our organization, and thank you so much for your service and making it so easy for me as a new person to transition into this role. I want to thank you for everything you've done for me since I came into this role and prior when I was a spectator.
That's right.
You were always very helpful and very open to our community, and I just want you to know how much I appreciate you, and I wish you much enjoyment in your retirement.
Thank you.
As most retirees find out, if too many people find out you're retired, they will fill all those hours with
Yeah, that's
plenty
happening.
of non-paid service.
Thank you, I appreciate
But
that. It
thank
serves
you
me
so
to my
much
purpose.
for everything you've done for both FCPS and our community.
Thank you. It's been my privilege.
Ms. Cannon, I've really enjoyed working with you here on the policy committee. Yeah, and I also want to note, when I had a death in my family last summer, your kindness and your there are condolence notes and then there are condolence notes. You expressed such concern and kindness, and it really touched me and it really helped me through a difficult period. And I want to thank you.
You're very welcome. Very welcome. Thank you.
So
Now
with
please
that-
adjourn.
So with that, we go to 1.10 and adjourn.
Yes.